Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" Please be seated. I was 37 miles into a 68-mile race through the forests and mountains of Quebec, and I was miserable. It was already around noon. The sun was high overhead. This is in the middle of July, beating down on us. I had just left an aid station where I had changed my socks and refilled my water bottles and choked down a grilled cheese. I left the town where the aid station was, thinking that leaving the asphalt would lead to maybe it feeling a little bit cooler, that being under the shade of trees would feel like relief. But there was no relief in the trees. The air still felt stagnant, thick, hot, humid. And I found myself starting to flag. My energy levels dipped. Suddenly, it was harder and harder to keep running. The trail was undulating, these little ups and downs. And whereas earlier in the race I had found myself running most of the steps except on the steepest terrain, suddenly every little uphill I found myself just wanting nothing more than to stop running, to just walk a little ways. My pace got slower and slower. As my energy dipped lower and lower, it felt hotter and hotter. I got passed by one person, then another, and other people kept coming by me, folks who looked like they were doing much better than I was. And something shifted in my mind. It wasn't, how am I going to do this, but can I do this at all? Am I going to make it these last 20-something, 30 miles? Am I going to reach the finish? I found myself starting to fantasize about what it would be like to just give it up, to drop at the next aid station, to walk away, to call it. I was convinced that nothing could or would improve, that I was just destined for this sort of continual decline, running less, walking more, until finally I wouldn't take another step. And then somewhere along the way, another runner came up beside me. He slowed to going about my pace. I said, no, go on, I'm fine. He said, no, I could use slowing down a little bit too. And so we ran together. We started talking. Where are you from? What brought you here? What other races have you run? What distances have you done before? Is this your first time running this far? The usual stuff. And then he said to me, I was really surprised to catch up to you. I saw you pass by me earlier. You looked really strong. You were running really well. And I demurred something, thank you, or I appreciate that. But it didn't feel true. Every part of me wanted to be like, that's not true. Everything is terrible. That's how I felt in that moment. We ran together for another half mile or so. And then something started to shift. I don't know if it was dipping down off of the sort of plateau we were on towards a canyon where things were cooled a little bit by the river below. I don't know if it was just running more downhill than uphill for a little while to recharge my legs, or the carbohydrates from the grilled cheese finally kicking in. But I started running a little bit more, a little bit faster. At one point, I found myself separating from this companion I had been with for the last little bit. And he was the one to say to me, just go on. Suddenly, I had my legs underneath me again. And I can't help but think that it had something to do with his words. Nothing grand, nothing over the top, but just simple words of encouragement, of someone outside myself noticing something in me that I could not see in that moment. Over the course of the next 20 miles, I still had plenty of low points, but I was running again. I passed some of those same people who had passed me early on. I caught up to people who I thought were long gone. I made it through the section, through the canyon, over all these different rocks and boulders, up and over Mount St. Anne and over the backside, until finally I came to the finish line. I finished the race. And the moment that I keep thinking about was that moment there 30-something miles in. And the simple words of a companion along the way, saying to me everything short of, "You can do this." When Peter saw the man walking out on the water towards their boat, he said to him, "If it is you, Lord, command me to come onto the water." And Jesus said to him, "Come." The Gospels give us this account of Jesus' life and ministry, all the things he did, but they also give us an account of the disciples. They're the story of the disciples almost as much as they are the story of Jesus. These followers of his who are just trying to figure it out, who Jesus has called, who have eagerly and enthusiastically decided to follow him, and yet at every turn seem to either miss the big picture, get bogged down in the details, or just generally get kind of confused about what Jesus is all about. And yet still they continue to follow him, continue to understand more and more of who he is and what he has come to do, to get that fuller picture of what it means for him to be the Messiah. Theirs is not this linear journey where they steadily and progressively get better and better and better at their job of being a disciple. It comes and fits and starts. They have low moments and dips. They have these moments of clarity where it seems like they are completely on message. And yet still Jesus entrusts them with everything. And none is more true for than Peter. Sort of bumbling Peter, who is like full of enthusiasm and eagerness, who is always the first one to raise his hand and say, "I get it," or "I'm there with you, Lord." And yet also is the one to kind of constantly fall on his face. I think there's no greater example of that than Peter denying Jesus 3 times during the crucifixion scene and the moments after. And then we get this scene. When the disciples see Jesus walking on the water, through the storm, through the wind, and on top of the waves, they're amazed and trying to make sense of it. They're not even sure it's him. And then Peter says to him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come onto the water." Peter is so certain. He has such profound faith that if Jesus just says the word, then he too can step out onto the water, that he can step into the waves and into the wind and be held up by it. The Jesus authority, the Jesus love is enough to allow even him to walk on that water. And so when Jesus says, "Come," Peter steps out of the boat, certain that he will come to join his Lord. But then those old doubts, those old fears, those old uncertainties, another voice comes into his head. "This is impossible. Look at those waves. Feel that wind. There's no way you can stand on the water. It's impossible. You can't do this." And as soon as that fear takes hold, as soon as he loses focus on Jesus standing before him and instead diverts his attention to the waves, to the wind, to every reason why he can't do what he's doing, he starts to falter, to find the footing underneath him go, and realizes that he is sinking into the water. Waves are starting to lash against his face, the wind driving the rain sideways into him. He calls out one more time, "Lord, save me." And Jesus reaches down his hand, pulls Peter up out of the water, and together they step onto the boat. The waves calm, the storm abates, and they stand there on the boat together, and the calm of the seas that just seconds before were raging in the storm. In some ways, this story is the gospel in miniature. It is the story of the disciples wanting to follow Jesus, earnestly and eagerly stepping out to do so, faltering and failing along the way, and yet Jesus continually reaches out to them. Jesus reaches his arms out to them, pulls them up out of the water they're drowning in, and stands on the deck of the boat with them. The seas having calmed, the wind having let go of its fierceness, and he stands with them. He pulls them out. He pulls Peter out of that water, just as he promises that he will do for all who follow him time and again. Jesus promises that in those moments that we feel like we're drowning in the stress of our lives, all of the things that we have to do, the pressures of family and work and life. Maybe it's grief that we're drowning in, or uncertainty over some waiting for the call from the doctor to give us the diagnosis that we know we don't want to hear. Or maybe it's that we feel like we're drowning in all of the obligations of who is taking the kids where and when and how we're going to manage that, as well as take care of all of these other tasks. Maybe it's drowning in fear over the future, the direction that our country is heading in, seeing all of these forces greater than ourselves, looking like they are going to overwhelm us, like those waves overwhelming the disciples in the boat. But it is in the midst of all of that that this gospel shows us a Jesus who reaches out to grab our hands and pull us through it. A Jesus who offers us hope that there is a way forward if only we can have faith. And then a Jesus who in those moments where even our faith seems to falter and fail, has faith that we ourselves cannot have. There are times in all of our lives when we need that hand to pull us out. So often that hand comes from another person and from another place, from that person who is able to have faith in those moments that we cannot. It was something like that I experienced there on that trail in Quebec. Someone who saw in me something that I could not see. Someone willing to reach out, to pull me up, to give me a confidence that I could not have, to remind me that what I had hoped to do was possible. That the sort of fears that I was dwelling in, those fears that I had let overwhelm me, would not have the last word. And that is like what it is to live a life of faith, to follow Jesus Christ. It's to trust that our fears, our anxieties, that feeling of overwhelm, that sensation of drowning will not have the last say. But that whenever we call out, Lord, save me, that Christ is there to pull us up out of the water. And Christ also calls us to follow his lead, to follow in his footsteps, and to be the ones who reach out to others in the midst of their own drowning. Just a couple weeks ago here, we held a funeral for someone who wasn't a part of this church, but this seemed the right place for them to honor their loved one who had died. It was a man who had died suddenly in a biking accident, leaving his wife and family reeling, trying to figure out how to make sense of this sudden loss, figure out how to honor the life of this man who they loved and who was such a presence to them. And trying to take those first steps into grieving the one who they loved. We held the service, we said the prayers, we spoke about the man who died, we offered prayers on his behalf. But as someone witnessing and a part of all of this, I think the most powerful moment for me came after the service. As I led the family out of the church, and folks started to filter out to greet the widow, and greet the family, a member of our community who was there went over to the widow grabbed her hands. And this is someone, the person who reached out is someone who lost their own husband just a couple of years ago. She reached out to this widow, grabbed her hand, and said something to the effect of, "It will not always feel like this." It was this profound moment of seeing, of recognizing the ways that this woman felt like she was drowning in that fresh grief, drowning in not knowing how to move forward, drowning in not knowing what the next day, week, month would hold. This person reached out to her, pulled her back up onto the boat, if even just for a moment, and assured her that the seas would calm. Not that things would get easy, not that grief would come to an end, but that at least there was a way forward. There are moments in all of our lives when we need that hand reaching out to us, holding faith for us where we cannot. That we need that arm of Christ to reach out to us and pull us onto the boat, to help us see that someday the storm will abate, that someday the waves will stop, that the wind will clear, and that we will make it to the other side of that ocean. And there are times when we are called to be that person reaching out, to reach out to another who is drowning, to reach out to them in their grief and their anxiety and their fear, to reach out to them in love. Knowing that there are times in our lives that we will only make it through in and through the love of God that is reaching out to us, through that word that is very near to us, through the saving arm of Christ, who can and will pull us back up onto the boat time and time again. Amen.